Hi tea sippers, welcome to an all new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. Let's get right into it because there's a lot to get to. Hello tea sippers, welcome to an all new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long, bringing it to you fresh every single week. And this time, let's go ahead and dive into the happenings in the world, starting with this recent ruling on conversion therapy. Take a listen to what ABC News has to say.
The Supreme Court has struck down Colorado's ban on conversion therapy. That therapy includes efforts to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity during talk therapy. Major American medical groups consider it ineffective and harmful, and 27 states outlaw that practice. But a Christian licensed therapist alleged the Colorado law violates her free speech rights and prevents her from openly talking with clients about their desire to rid themselves of same-sex attractions or better align with their biological sex. Now the High Court has ruled in her favor.
Strong, almost unanimous ruling by this very conservative Supreme Court, drawing support from Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, that in fact Colorado's law, which was enacted several years ago to protect minors from the forcible efforts of therapists to try to change their sexual orientation and gender identity, does infringe on the free speech rights of those providers. Now, Colorado had argued that talk therapy is a medical treatment and the state should be able to regulate that treatment like any other medical treatment. But Justice Neil Gorsuch, writing for the court's majority here, said that what Colorado has done, limiting the ability of counselors to talk to their patients about their identity, changes they want to see made, quote, censures speech based on viewpoint. And he said that Colorado law doesn't just regulate the content of that speech, but in fact, in his view and the majority's view, goes a step further, prescribing what she can and cannot say. So this is a big win, not only for First Amendment advocates, but for really for Christian, the Christian groups that had backed Ms. Childs and her Christian-based medical practice in Colorado, which had sought to open the door to a Christian-friendly treatment options for these types of kids.
All right, tea sippers, so let's dive right into this discussion on conversion therapy, but let's start by getting some facts out of the way. So conversion therapy does force a lot of people to be closeted because that is the intention of conversion therapy, and it's also an ethical failure because of the religious biases that is being brought into counseling, which has no place in proper ethical counseling. So let's start with the truth that doesn't bend. What doesn't change just because a court says otherwise is the fact that conversion therapy is harmful, it's unethical, it's quite frankly disgusting, and it's rejected by every medical and mental health organization in the United States. And there's data that backs that up very loudly. So if we look at the Trevor Project, especially from their national survey on LGBTQ plus youth mental health in 2025, we know that a lot of young people who identify as LGBTQ plus not only have experienced conversion therapy, but it's to the point where a lot of children have reported their safety being kind of challenged in regards to some of the recent information that has come out from a lot of religious affiliates within their local communities. But the Trevor Project basically just says that more than double the rate of suicide attempts happen with LGBTQ plus youth compared to their peers who were not subjected to conversion therapy. There's also some stats that the Trevor Project talked about when they said that significantly higher levels of depression, anxiety, and trauma symptoms are reported for those youth who experience conversion therapy, while there's lower levels of family trust and safety, especially when conversion efforts were religiously motivated. So there's already this umbrella and there's already this family dynamic that's in play where they're being told by their own parents that who they are is not appropriate and that is against God. So over 80% said that attempts changed their identity but made them feel unsafe, right? And it made them feel unlovable and broken. So these attempts to change their identity are not only a way to distract from the fact that there is harm within a lot of these far-right lunatic abilities to control youth and try to make them someone who they're not, But it also speaks to this most recent ruling by SCOTUS, right? So ABC News, as we just watched, reported that the United States Supreme Court ruled 8-1, which is quite extreme. And this was that Colorado cannot enforce its ban on conversion therapy, framing that talk-based conversion efforts are a protected speech, especially for private entities. The court argued that the law censors speech based on a viewpoint, while LGBT advocates warned the ruling will expose more minors to trauma. And we know that to be the case based on the stats that were presented, but based on the information that we already know. So, looking further at this, let's talk about closeting. So, especially in the mental health field, there may be reasons why therapists will want to stay closeted. So, let's get that part out the way first. That could be because of employment. It could be because of safety, community pressure. There are very real threats of losing clients, right? Because income, that kind of thing. And I experienced it myself where I've met with clients who don't want to meet with me because I am a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And it happened here in Wisconsin several times. But most importantly, people also talk about the physical safety and hostile environments where someone, if they find out that you're a part of the community, they might try to harm you. So there's a lot of things to consider here. But those are all rooted in survival. What this is talking about in regards to forcing therapists to closet themselves, but most importantly, push their ability to closet children because of their religious doctrine is not safety. And it's coercion, it's unethical, and it undermines the very foundation of the therapeutic process, which is you're supposed to go and build trust with a professional so that you can feel comfortable expressing and being who you are. That's what therapy is for. So a therapist hiding who they are because they choose to protect themselves is one thing. But a therapist hiding who they are because an employer, church, or supervisor demands it is obviously another thing, which puts the therapist in danger. But it also puts your clients in danger if you are putting your bias onto someone who is as vulnerable as a young person, right? So there's a portion of this where we talk about survival, but there's also a portion of this where it comes to oppression and bullying and harassing those because of who they are and how they identify. So religion has no place in ethical counseling. And the reason why is because counseling basically teaches us professionals to avoid biases, judgments, and anything that is basically breaks a client's humanity. Basically anything that breaks them apart and tells them that who they are is not okay. And cultural humility is not really an option in this field. So there's just a lot going on here with this decision. Self-reflection, awareness of personal biases, recognition of power dynamics, commitment to lifelong learning, what happened to the respect for the client's lived experience. All those things are important. And we know that the Trevor Project survey found that religiously motivated rejection was one of the strongest predictors of suicide attempts among LGBTQ plus youth. So knowing this information, why would SCOTUS decide this with the risks that are at play, especially when it comes to the lives of actual children? So both practices, conversion therapy and forcing someone to be in a closet, come from the same toxic root, right? Of trying to weaponize shame, trying to distort authenticity, trying to fracture a person's ability to be in a relationship with themselves, right? And be in a relationship with those who they love. But most importantly, it violates this ethical practice and definitely a lot of ethical principles within the social work profession, counseling profession, and just all over the place. So no court ruling can change the truth that LGBTQ plus people deserve safety, dignity, and care that affirms their humanity. And I don't care what SCOTUS says, you all listen to Dr. Long, right? Listen to me. Conversion therapy is harmful, it's abuse, it's bullying, and it has no place to be here in the United States of America other than to push an agenda from those who are religious onto those who are vulnerable to make it seem like hating and going against someone's ability to be themselves is okay when it's never okay. It is never okay. All right, tea sippers, I wanted to switch gears because this most recent year, I would say 2025, would be a year where I kind of came to a point where I just stopped associating myself with a lot of people for comments based on dishonesty when it comes to our history and skipping over facts. And someone who likes to skip over facts is Nick Cannon, who wanted to put out this statement about how Democrats were a part of the KKK. Well, guess what? KKK people were Republicans and are Republicans now. And there's a huge part of history that gets missed where both parties kind of switch ideologies that a lot of people don't talk about. And there's been times where I've had to cut off friends who have told me that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, so I need to get over history and I need to get over my blackness and move on. And obviously, I don't talk to those people anymore, but let's take a listen to Nick Cannon and hear what he has to say, because I don't want to give him a platform, but it's definitely worth a discussion on Clock the Tea. Take a listen.
Nick Cannon sat down with Amber Rose to interview her, and Cannon called the Democrats the KKK, the party of the KKK.
Wow.
And said that he asked with Trump. We got audio for that one.
People don't know that the Democrats is the party of the KKK.
Yep.
People don't know that the Republicans are the party that freed the slaves.
Yep.
I mean, both of you and I have some conservative views. You just a little bit more outspoken about
He's
it.
like, yo, if y'all didn't know y'all history, you know what I'm saying? The Democrat Party was the party of the KKK. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, I do know my history, my guy. That was in like 1950 something, and then a little something called the Civil Rights Movement happened, and then the whole thing flipped over.
I love waterfalls, right? I love Wildin' Out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I love, the ad-libs on the Kanye album. I don't look to any of these people for any of my political thoughts at
Right.
all. You know
So
what I'm
that
saying?
is the question, right? Celebrity accountability and responsibility when it comes to politics.
Yeah.
Why does it get us upset? And are we supposed to care this much? I think some people just look to celebrities like, yo, inform me.
Yeah.
I'm too busy. And that might not even be their fault. They might be too busy. Even the news is like, you know what I mean? So you got to do a lot of digging to get to the bottom of things. And a lot of people don't want to do the digging, and they'll just be like, Nick Cannon, tell me what to say. Tell me what to think.
Yeah.
Okay, that was Hot 97, bringing it to you, like they always do. They always talk about these topics. I think celebrities don't owe us anything, so I want to get that out the way. But I want to be very, very clear about just the dishonesty and the lack of education that a lot of people have in regards to history and just knowing things and using Republican talking points to just make them feel immersed in their white guilt for thinking what they think in regards to Black history and how they feel like it should be erased and that we need to move on. So let me just say it plainly. Being Black in MAGA is not the win. It's not the intellectual win that these people think it's going to be. It's not what they think it's giving. It's actually a masterclass in missing the historical forest in all these political trees that are popping up with this new MAGA ideology and pushing the agenda and erasing books and getting rid of statues in museums and like basically all of that, right? And yes, I'm looking directly at the comments from Nick Cannon because Republicans were abolitionists. Sure. Okay. Right. It's a talking point that the right likes to use a lot. But Nick Cannon said what he said, but here's the part he skipped. Republicans were the party of abolition in the 1800s. Democrats were the party of slavery in the 1800s. But the problem is pretending the story ends there. And I think that's what happens when people don't pay attention in history class. I've had several so-called friends, or they're not friends anymore, that would often try to push this agenda about, why does it matter? Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Shouldn't we all move on? The truth and the actual truth is that both parties gradually switch ideologies over time. And here's the thing. A lot of Republicans know this, but they know it pisses off people who are intelligent, who are liberal, who are progressive, because it's a way of dismissing all of the context when it comes to Reconstruction and Jim Crow, the Great Migrations, both migrations, right? We had one happen in the 20s and the 30s after World War I, after a lot of people came back from the war, and there's lynchings left and right. And then the same thing happened again in the 50s and 60s, where lynchings were continuing, and there's a lot more of a migration happening again. So we also have to look at the New Deal, right, that happened after the Great Depression, segregation and how that was legalized, all these Jim Crow laws that were put into place to keep Black people disenfranchised, and most importantly, the Civil Rights Movement. So, by the late 1960s, the parties had reorganized, and that was around topics on race. Even in regions across the United States, ideology switched. The party of Lincoln is what they called the new party, the new Republican Party, right? And basically, it's a lot more meaningless in 2026 because, let's be clear, the KKK had members who were both Democrats and Republicans. And racism was and has never been a one-party disease. Racism was not confined to the South. Black people were terrorized, redlined, excluded, and disenfranchised nationwide. So we were not allowed to vote even without there being violence or intimidation or any kind of bureaucratic sabotage. So when MAGA folks in the far right tried to weaponize the 1800s party labels to justify 2020 politics, it's not clever, it's not historically accurate, and it's not even original. It's just loud talking points that they hear from Fox News and from their grandparents and parents who are absolutely atrocious when it comes to religion. So the fact that so many MAGA supporters can't even articulate this basic timeline is exactly why books should not be banned. It's just quite dangerous to ban books. People are out here quoting their racist grandpa like they're historians. Like, just read. You know what I mean? Please, for the love of God, just read. Nick Cannon, just go and open a book. You know, Chili, stop saying all lives matter. Stop donating to MAGA. You can do whatever you want. I believe if you're a Republican, believe what you want. But at some point, you have to come to reality and realize, okay, I don't necessarily agree with MAGA and the Republicans Party's stance on race. First and foremost, my blackness and who I am and my safety should be at the forefront. But a lot of these MAGA-aligned people don't really look at that. They just look at their faith and think of it in that sense of things. And they get confused with political clarity. And there's always this need to kind of like make sure they're like centering the reality and apologizing and whatever. I don't care. So this all lives matter thing that Chili tried to perpetuate in the past came to bite her in the butt because of her recent donations to MAGA and how she was kind of using that as a term to seem neutral on the conversation in regards to Black Lives Matter and making sure that, you know, black people are not being targeted by white police officers in the United States. Due to our history of lynching and everything that comes with the policing of black people and brown people. So when a black public figure supports a movement and has these weird talking points that are very, very Republican and conservative and far right and evangelical, like basically geared, it kind of pushes cultural narratives in a way that harms black communities. And it raises questions because a lot of these people are black, right? That we're talking about, specifically Chili and Nick Cannon. And it kind of contradicts their lived reality when it comes to what they might have experienced from harm, right? And what we experience. So while being black in MAGA is problematic, we all know that. We all know specifically it's problematic because historically and socially and ethically, there's just a lot of half-truths that a lot of white people, especially white conservative people, try to push. There's a lot of this selective memory, you know, oh yeah, I learned about that in school, but we should get over it, that kind of thing. There's this religious aspect of sweeping things under the rug. There's a lot of this anti-black narrative when it comes to repackaging blackness as being independent, like moving beyond history and beyond circumstances and systemic oppression and pressures from society and still thriving. It's like a lot of us weren't given this golden like factor, a donation, a silver spoon. That's not how it works. And there's this desire to differentiate oneself from the broader black community, especially for those who made it, if you will, like some of these celebrities. So let's just talk about the fact that people should not pretend that voter suppression is imaginary, the structural racism is a myth, that the civil rights movement was basically something that was just kind of pushed as a way for us to be nice. No, it was a realignment with society and kind of fixing 150 years of racial policies that, in fact, matter more than what these people are pretending that they don't, that we should just move on. So this is all this sweeping array of colorblindness and this weird part of, you know, being an erasure for liberation in the United States. And Nick Cannon's comments were profound, you know, but they were clearly incomplete. Chili's comments about all life matters and that stance wasn't neutral. It was aligned with this colorblindness that she was trying to portray due to her faith. And I need a lot of black people to stop hiding behind faith and hiding behind this new movement, this new MAGA uninformed movement, because it only just makes you look ignorant. It doesn't make you look like that you're looking at the community as a whole, because not all black people are the same, first and foremost. But most importantly, we have to look at history. And history tells us that a lot of people, and no, I'm not saying all Republicans are racist. I'm saying if you're MAGA aligned and you're donating money to them, and you know that this administration is harming members of our community, you are complicit. You're not being authentic, and you're only going with what your talking points from the right are telling you, when in reality, a lot of people are suffering from rhetoric that comes out like that. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents because I just think it's disgusting. Last but not least, Pam Bondi has been fired, and also Kristi Noem's husband is a crossdresser. That's a lot of interesting tea, considering that's the party that doesn't like anything that has to do with any of the gender spectrum. Interesting. Take a listen to this.
Tonight, loyalty was apparently not enough to save Pam Bondi's job.
We are so proud to work at the directive of Donald Trump.
According to sources, the president vented his frustration to allies, then a heated confrontation with Bondi last week. That led to today's shakeup. He fired the attorney general, posting, "We love Pam." As he announced, she is transitioning to a much-needed and important new job in the private sector. An unspecified role where Bondi said she is thrilled to continue fighting for President Trump. From two-term Florida AG to the Trump administration.
The partisanship, the weaponization will be gone.
The president raised expectations and pressure publicly.
She's going to go down as a great attorney general. I may change my mind about that. I don't know. Maybe someday I'll have call and say I was only kidding.
Missteps caused political pain. On the Jeffrey Epstein files, Bondi claimed DOJ had the late sex offender's client list.
It's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Later reversing course with a memo and testimony before Congress.
Our memo on Epstein clearly points out that there was no client list, our July 6th memo.
Bondi was caught in a tight corner with MAGA, Epstein survivors, and bipartisan lawmakers demanding more Epstein disclosures. The president blasted the Epstein attention as distraction, all while Mr. Trump expected her to prosecute his perceived adversaries.
I'm looking at Pam because I hope something's going to be done about it. These people put our country at great danger.
The president posted his complaints to Pam, writing, "All talk, no action, nothing is being done."
We'll be taking all available legal action.
Tonight, reaction about Bondi from the family of Epstein accuser, the late Virginia Giuffre. "We hope she has the courage to testify and actually do right by survivors this time."
That was nightly news from April 2nd on NBC. So I want to dive into this a little bit more because this is suspiciously convenient. You know what I mean? Obviously, the president was very critical of her, right, of Pam, but this is all just complete chaos. I think she knew she was getting fired. I think this is all a game by the president of the United States. None of anything that's coming out in the news cycle that I am going to be acting like I know everything about, because there's clearly a lot of secrets happening. And I think Pam's just being switched around to another role. I think she served her ability to be Trump's personal defense attorney as attorney general, which is completely absurd. And she failed. She's awful. She failed, and she didn't put the responsibility on making sure the victims got justice. She put the responsibility on protecting that pedophile. So because Bondi wasn't just any official, she was one of the people that were at the center of the Epstein file redaction controversy. She's basically the one who basically was combative, right? Remember, she was combative and defensive when being questioned. So this just all comes into play to show us that her insults and her inability to answer questions didn't let her keep her job. It didn't do anything for her in the end. And CNN and Midas Touch both pointed out that Bondi's firing conveniently shifts the narrative away from the Epstein documents, because clearly there's some turnover happening. The redactions of the survivors, obviously, that was being criticized. It also is a way for the president to kind of close a chapter in front of America saying, okay, that part's done, when clearly we're not done talking about it. it also questions, and Midas Touch talked about this too, but it questions the fact that she clearly dodged a lot of questions in that hearing, but it also puts more pressure on transparency, right? Because now that she's been turned over and she's been ousted, what does this mean, right? When it comes to accountability, is this the administration that just wants to avoid accountability? Is this firing a way to just erase everything that's been happening? Basically not give the victims any more, justice for what they're trying to seek in regards to the harm that has been done, especially with the redactions and the sloppiness with that. And it definitely doesn't erase the fact that Epstein files are still raising eyebrows across the country and around the world. So Bondi's exit is not a closure, and it's just a distraction. And moving on to talk about more hypocrisy with this Trump administration, we know that Noem was also fired a couple weeks ago or last week. And this whole family values mirage that the Republicans like to live behind is just disgusting. And the same Noem who built her brand on traditional values and moral superiority and policing other people's lives is the same Noem who spent years pushing legislation, that targets LGBTQ plus people in disguise of protecting children. Meanwhile, her husband is sitting around with his knockers out, and she is in a plane in the air, privately flying around with taxpayer dollars, having sex with one of her staffers. So let's be clear here. There's nothing wrong with cross-dressing. As a person who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, who celebrates drag and cross-dressing and just everything in terms of being yourself and anything that the right considers secular, I support it. Because life is short. And as a community, there's a lot of us who already have to deal with a lot of shame in the first place. So the issue of weaponizing morality, right, against queer and trans people while your own household doesn't fit the rigid boxes you demand everyone else lives in is the definition of hypocrisy. It's the absolute definition of hypocrisy. And the issue here is pushing anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric around, right, while benefiting from this very freedom of expression that you are denying others. Both of them. They both sat in that hearing. She sat right behind them when they were talking about the affair and the questions that she had to face right before she got fired. So this isn't about shaming her husband. It's honestly about the double standard, and it's about shaming her. Everything that she stood for. She talked about groomers and protecting children, and all of a sudden she's devastated and she goes silent when the mirrors turn her inward to face her and her husband. So between Bondi's firing, the Noem hypocrisy, the MAGA movement's revisionist history, and all of this is a pattern that I'm seeing right now, tea-sippers. There's deflection, there's distraction, there's denying any contradiction, and with this whole family values thing that the right likes to push on, it comes to show you that they're their own worst enemy, and it's all smoke and mirrors when it comes to them. The media calling out its own bias is something that they're scared of. And the media calling out the bias from the right is also something they're scared of. Look at what they did with the Epstein files. So when you build a political movement on moral panic, right? And this historical amnesia and selective outrage and white is important, right? And it will catch up to you, and that's what history shows us. And right now, obviously, they're sprinting towards, what they have to do in terms of protecting their money and that kind of thing. But they're also probably panicking because of what it looks like. And everything that I explained today in the pod is the right's way of saying that the media and people like me are putting this information out there to get people to not support Republicans, not support MAGA. That's actually the opposite of what I'm doing. It's clear that all of these distractions, all of this deflection, all of this denial from the right is only just making their movement look less authentic. No one is perfect. And as much as they want to use the Bible to disenfranchise other people, or like Nick Cannon try to use his platform to try to nitpick history and say what you can say and like give voice to talking points on the right, it's just disgusting in 2026. And I think we have to take our opinions to the booth this November and get these crazy lunatic people out of here. Get these people who like to judge people. Get all these people who live with a higher moral standard when behind closed doors they're doing something egregious. Get these people out of here. They're disgusting. They're trying to make people seem less than. And just remember this from Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. You all are important, and these people, their time is going to be up soon. Just, keep listening to everything you got to listen to and make the right decision come November. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long, bringing it to you fresh every single week. But most importantly, you know where to get your tea. Thanks for listening. Bye.